Hi, friends. Stephanie here, and I wanted to welcome you to my channel. This channel is really about helping people to figure out ways to grow their own food. And then how do you use that food you grow? Because I do get that question a lot. A lot of times people step into this gardening space, but then don't really understand fully how to use the things they're growing because food at the grocery store is different than the things we're going to grow at home. Things are happening with the food systems. It's been in place for a long time. It's something I have followed for many, many years. And we're seeing a huge rollout of that right now. If you guys follow food news, you know what I'm talking about. You may be new to this concept. And if you are and you have more questions, definitely feel free to reach out or post in the comments. Or if anybody wants to share in the comments some of the things they're hearing about what's going on with the food, definitely let's start the conversation. But things are changing around food. We are moving further away from real food. We've actually been programmed to eat fake food and food that's really harmful for our health and was designed to be addictive and all the things. But more than that, we always still had like this balance of kind of this fake food industry, but then real food, people making meals from scratch at home and food that comes from farms. But that is starting to shift as well as part of this new food movement and this new food plan, where I think, a lot of the fake foods were to program us to accept that. If you look around a grocery store, how much is actual food from a farm at this point? Not much. Most of it's packaged in boxes. And so that was a great way to condition people to view that as food and to step away from real food. And then now it's just getting upped to the next level where things are made in a lab meats, insects as proteins, lots of changes. And, sadly, our generation or our children are the experiment to these products and to these foods. And we're seeing the fruit of that experiment. Children are very sick, obesity, diabetes, heart conditions, so many things, autoimmune, cancers through the roof. I mean, with adults 50 and under, all the way to our children, it's, we're seeing the fruit. It's out of control. And so lately I've been kind of thinking and praying about this channel and rebranding a little bit, because initially I was just talking about tower gardens as a way to grow food in any space, because that's what I do here. I don't have a lot of space. I feel like my days personally of hard labor trying to grow in the soil with the things I've seen happen, I don't have a farm, so I can't do that in a self-sustaining way. So I have moved away from that kind of gardening because I have to rely on too many inputs from other sources, and those inputs, the quality of them is going down. It's too hard. It's just too hard. The labor's too hard. The resources are too hard. Trusting those resources has become too hard. So I moved into alternative ways to garden, with aeroponic tower gardens being the main source. But I've also expanded outside of that because I need to grow a lot of food. I need to replace the grocery store. And so there are other methods that I'm adding in and other systems like mushroom growing, raised beds. I do like my Vigo raised beds for things I can't grow with hydroponics. I also have a new hydroponic system you guys are going to see soon for some things that just don't do amazing indoors on a tower garden. And so my goal is always whatever systems are easy to sustain, have some self-sustainability, don't require a lot of resources. A lot of these systems do require an initial investment to get them set up, but then afterwards, the resources to use them are things I can bulk buy and save a lot of money on. And so I'm using raised beds and permaculture and wild foraging and using the things in nature, and then trying to grow as much food as possible. And just sharing all of those ways with you guys. I mean, really, when I set out to do this channel, the goal was to document what I'm doing, document how I'm growing food, document how we're using food, in the hopes that it gives other people ideas, inspiration, tools to be able to do it themselves. And really, that's all I can do. I can only document and speak to the things that I am working on here in our homestead. And I also am a believer in a simple lifestyle. I've shared my story before about how we sold everything we owned, moved into a camper, traveled the country. It's how we ended up here. And it's how we were able to wrap our minds around living in a small cabin. Our cabin is definitely not as small as some people choose to live, and I am certainly not a minimalist. I like things. I like having my toys and my ways of preparing food, and you've seen the inside of my house. There's a lot going on in there, but it is a smaller cabin for a family of 5. And that was intentional just because we wanted to live a simple life where everything is smaller and easier to manage. And I take that concept into my gardening. So you'll notice everything I'm growing, it's right by my front door. I grow my towers on my driveway or in my garage. We don't use our garage for cars. We sacrifice that space to growing food. So we're making sacrifices here. I grow towers right by my front door in my permaculture landscaping. I've got my mushroom tower right by the front door. So many bushes and medicinal herbs and all the things. And it's the idea of like I always like the word potager, or I like the American version, which is a potager garden, which is a kitchen garden that is set up for yearly function. So you always have access to food, but it's also set up for beauty as well. I find food and food systems and growing food to be so beautiful, and I try to make it look nice. There's always, room for improvement, obviously, as things change throughout the years, and I am working to make some parts of our property a little more beautiful than they are. But it's about growing a lot of food in small spaces that are right at your fingertips. They're right out your door. So they're always in your mind, because out of sight, out of mind. That's why people's gardens fail when they set up big row gardens. They go out of town, they get sick, they get tired of the heat, and they don't go out and weed their garden for a couple of days, and then everything gets taken over, and then it's overwhelming. Nobody wants to go in and fix the problem because it's too much work. It's not fun. And I know that from experience because I've done it before. And then there's the other issue that a lot of people just don't have the space to do that. I didn't have the space in this house, and it was such a gift from the Lord, because had I really thought through when we bought this house, I probably would not have purchased it, because I really wanted to homestead, have lots of rolling hills, lots of land to grow an enormous amount of food in a very traditional way of just pretty much tilling the land and trying to build up the soil and doing silage tarps and all the things you may see homesteaders that are working to grow their own food that are doing that. But I really don't want to do those things. I've done those things, and that is where this property really opened up an opportunity to think through, okay, I like things small. So it became a challenge of, how do we do all those things? How do we grow all the berries and the fruits and the medicinal herbs and the mushrooms and replace the grocery store? And how do we do it in a really small space? And how do we do it in a way that's not physically overwhelming and that doesn't require hours and hours of weeding and hard manual labor? And that's what this is. Doesn't mean there isn't work. There are times I have to clean systems. There are things I have to grow in my raised beds if I want to have access to them at home and not in the grocery store, because they don't, garlic and onions, potatoes, carrots, those things aren't going to grow in hydroponic or aeroponic systems. But doing it at a small scale, keeping everything close, finding ways to make things sustainable, all of that has become really fun because my systems are manageable. So I can grow mushrooms in the garage, for example, and when my fruiting blocks are burning out or done blooming inside, in an effective way, I can take them outside and put them in straw and grow them in a raised bed outside. And when those break down and they aren't thriving anymore, I can take all of that straw and I can put it in my Vigo raised beds where I'm growing spinach or something that just doesn't do really well on the towers, carrots, and use it as the mulch. And we have these systems that are easy to manage that you can chip away at a little bit every day. So it's not about having to till a huge row of something and then figuring out how to can it and preserve it and then not having access to food for a really long time until the next season. It's about every day having something fresh to harvest, having something fresh to put on the table, having a little excess to put away. And then all of a sudden you're in a place where you're not going to the grocery store anymore and you have enough food coming out of your gardens that you can make entire recipes from things on your property. Just using these simple systems that don't require much thought, much effort. They do require some financial investment. We won't lie about that. The Vigo beds, all of it, there is an initial setup with all of these things. But they're also systems that last. I'm using the tower gardens because I have friends been growing on them for over 15 years in the hot Florida sun. I mean, these are systems that I'm not replacing ever, hopefully. Sometimes it's hard to tell because of the camera, but my yard is tiny. This is the smallest yard we have ever owned. And we actually lived in a beach condo or a beach duplex was our first home, and we had this tiny backyard. And there was actually more space to grow food in that backyard than there is in this space, just because the land isn't even. There were rocks put on this property because he was a mechanic and had a mechanic business here and had big trucks and things. So the ground is extremely compacted and not really usable. And then it's forest, and we love that it's forest, and we love that it's wild and it's natural, but it does not lend to having a lot of space to grow food. So I use that as an encouragement. Like if you're in a neighborhood and you've got rules where you can't grow a lot of food, these systems are a great way around that. Or if you just have a small yard, I'm growing so much food, friends, on my driveway and in the smallest spaces. I have so many nook and cranny food, I don't know what you would even call them, like forest or food systems in the smallest of space. Just the pathway walking to my front door, for example, there are a kiwi male and female plant for kiwis. There are 6 blueberry bushes, an assortment of medicinal herbs, a honeyberry bush, and probably 15 more things I can't even remember off the top of my head. That is, a 15-foot walkway to my front door. That is how much food is in there. So it's possible, and you wouldn't know it if I didn't tell you. When people come to my house, they don't know it's blueberries and things. They probably think my landscaping is a little wild looking. It is definitely not cookie cutter neighborhood kind of landscaping, but it's still beautiful. There's flowers and there's medicinals and there's herbs, and if I didn't tell anybody it was food, you wouldn't know it unless it was in full bloom. And I really hope that that's portrayed here and that I am helping to serve those of you who want the same things, who see what's happening with our food systems and want to take back control of something, whether it's just growing your own greens. Greens at the grocery store, like if that's the only thing you can do, that's a huge thing you can do. First off, start eating greens every day. They're so good for us. They're going to help to regenerate your cells, cleanse your cells, repair all the damage that's being done from all these toxins we're exposed to. It's just such a simple way to start on a health journey, is just grow greens and eat them. Because when we buy them from the grocery store, first off, now everybody's buying these salad kits that are in plastic. Drives me crazy, friends. Those plastics are made with the cheapest materials on the planet, and they're leaching chemicals into the healthy food you're trying to eat. The second issue, these greens are sprayed with so many things, And even if they're organic and they're not, they're finding forever chemicals in them, again, from the plastics of the packaging and all the plastics being used in organics. Forever chemicals are not tested as part of organic standards because it's not assumed that you would be spraying forever chemicals on food ever, but they're there because of the growing practices needed to grow food organically when people don't want to deal with weeds. Things like silage tarps, they leak chemicals into the soil that then goes into the foods. These greenhouses and all these things that are being tarped over food are getting into the foods, we're finding out. I feel like there is no excuse to not be growing some things, sprouting some things, chipping away at some of the most toxic things that we're being exposed to if we're eating them in the store, like the greens and the herbs. Like I mentioned, those are just so simple to take back control of and grow in our own homes. And then there's a second part to this idea of growing your own food, and it's changing how you view food and readjusting your taste buds to appreciate real food. That took me time. Like, I had to learn how to eat salads that weren't drenched in blue cheese dressing with croutons, right? That is what I was raised eating. The days of the salad bar. Remember, salad bars used to be a thing. They're not really a thing anymore. It's hard to find a salad bar these days. But you go to the salad bar, and I thought I was eating healthy because I'd take that white lettuce and drench everything in blue cheese dressing and put my croutons on top and, made a healthy salad. I remember one time I went to lunch with a coworker and he said, "That's the whitest salad I've ever seen," because everything on there was white. It wasn't, food. It wasn't healthy plants. But I didn't understand how to eat just plants and how to make those foods taste really good. So that's the second part of it, is how do you, grow some food, and then how do you make it taste good? And I've had people say that they'll get lettuce growing and then they don't like it because the texture's off. And so that's a learned skill too, and something I plan to, hopefully help guide you guys through as well. I have found ways to make lettuce and just plants taste so amazing, to the point where I don't even need salad dressings for most of my salads anymore. I'll actually take olives and I'll chop them up with some of my favorite nuts. Like right now I'm on a raw sunflower seed kick, and I just make a tempanade, which is like basically just chopped up olives, and you can put whatever in there. And that's all I need for the dressing. And that on top of the lettuce and the veggies, it's just so rich in flavor. But that also does not happen overnight. You don't just wake up one day, grow an entire tower of mushrooms that look like aliens, and start diving in and know what to do with them. We just have to take baby steps towards these things. Learning to ferment. All of those things are great. And then we also got to learn how to eat them and how to use them. And so I hope in this channel that I'm also guiding you. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is my purpose here too. The reason you see me prepping food in my kitchen is because when I see other people's kitchens and other ways that they live and how they eat food, I've been blessed to have some really cool friends who've been on the journey for a long time, and I go over to their homes and I'm like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that as food or how to put these things together. My hope is that I'm opening my doors into my kitchen and into my home to help guide you guys through some of those things as well. And the majority of it will be plant-based that you see on this channel, because I personally eat plant-based. And this channel, you don't see my children and my family because it's not a channel about my children and my family. But I've also recently been preparing a lot more for the children on camera for you guys. So you might see some homemade cheese and me using some milk that came from the cow, not from the grocery store, for my children and some of the things I prepare for them. Because if I believe in food autonomy, for one. They're allowed to eat. They're young adults at this point, most of them, or they're reaching into adulthood, and they have the right to eat the food that they feel is right for their bodies. But if they choose to eat those things, I want to make sure I'm teaching them the difference between what's real and what's not real. So if you want to eat beef, how do we get grass-fed beef from a local farm that we can drive to versus whatever they're selling at the grocery store that has sludge and added chemicals and what are they putting in? The dyes and all the things. There's a big difference in those. And they can see that now because they cook a lot of their own food and they can see the difference. I bought something from Costco once, meat for them, versus the meat we've been getting from our friend's farm. And there's no comparison. Like, it's a completely different product. And so I'm showing them real versus fake. And on that subject of real versus fake, I had a sweet friend at the gym kind of say she didn't like that term, real food. And I initially was like, oh, I can appreciate that and understand where that might be offensive. And then I went home and sat on it, and I really thought about that for a while. And then I became kind of angry at the whole thing because it's not real food. If you're buying food in a box, that's not real food. That is processed. They're using chemical waste products that need to be disposed of it or going into our food systems all for the sake of money. It's crazy what's going on. I'm not going to dive too deep into that. But if you go down that rabbit hole and really learn what a lot of this stuff, how it came to be, it's so corrupt and it's not real food. And when we are not speaking truth into this topic, we're not just not speaking truth into it, we're harming children. And so as an adult, a lot of adults don't know this information either because they've been victims of it. But the children really don't know. There are children who don't know where food comes from, like literally have no concept of farming or growing food or where actual food comes from. And they don't know it's not real food. No one's ever told them. They've been raised on this processed system where fast food is an everyday part of their lives, and they have no idea that it's making them ill, severely, severely ill, and that the food at McDonald's that their grandparents were eating used to be cooked. The French fries were cooked in animal fats and had 3 ingredients. Now they have 33 ingredients, and they don't know that. So I'll hear that sometimes, like, well, that's how my grandparents ate and they lived to be 90. It's not the same food. It's not the same processes of making the food. Everything's changed. And so I do use the term real food. There is fake food. Most of the food out there is fake. Some of the real foods, like milks, are now being synthesized and will be fake ice cream, fake butter, fake meats coming out of a lab. Like, we're going into the next level of this, like a whole nother phase of fake. And I do think it's important we speak into that because there are victims of these systems. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. If you see a little bit of rebranding, maybe a name change, that's why. Still haven't decided, but just trying to open the door to other ways of growing food. I'm going to keep expanding on this. Because, the systems I use might not be the best systems for everybody. And so I'm going to keep trying systems and trying new ways and showing you guys all the ones I like. The ones I don't like, you don't see because I don't think they're that great. I tend to stick to systems that are more, they're not novelty. These are systems for growing food. A lot of it at the least amount of cost, least amount of work. I always say simple, sustainable systems that can be used in any space. So I'm not going to be showing systems that require you to buy special pods that are expensive and that are like a novelty and that are connected to all the things. And so your app's telling you when to water things. I think those are stupid, personally, because, and maybe I shouldn't say they're stupid. I don't think it's necessary, and it really creates, again, fake food systems. We don't need an app to tell us when to water our food. We need to have an understanding of food and an understanding of plants and a simple way to grow them so that we can put food on the table. the healthiest food, the freshest food, and the food that is safe from all of these chemical processes that are occurring in our world and that are being used to grow food. And there's also the issue that food is lacking in nutrients these days because the soils are depleted. So when we're using these other systems where we can control what's going in them, and I'll be sharing more about nutrients and things like that in future videos, because those are also being tainted and being bought overseas and being produced at the least amount of cost as possible. You know, when we're growing our own food, not only do we have the advantage that it's protected from some things that might be sprayed on it, but we're giving these plants the actual nutrient contents they need to be complete and not depleted like most food that's coming out of the soil. I was reading some articles and it's predicted more than 30% just over the last 20 years is depleted. And that doesn't account for the depletion in the soil that occurred, you know, before 30 years ago. We're going on, I forget how many years of using glyphosate and these things that are destroying the soil, fake fertilizers, all of those things. So we have that advantage as well. So I'm just going to be sharing systems that work. And sprouting. I will be sharing more about sprouting on this channel in the future because that is such a way to get such a great way to get a lot of really nutrient dense food into your home very quickly, very affordably, and it's relatively easy once you get the hang of it. So thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up and the encouragement you guys give me and the feedback. I really appreciate it. And I just hope that I'm showing up to serve you guys, to help you feel empowered to grow some of your own food, feel empowered to use some of that food, to no longer fear real food. That's a whole nother rabbit trail I could go down. But there, we have been programmed to fear food, and I hear that a lot. I get lots of messages where people are just afraid to grow their own food, and once they grow a little bit, they're afraid to actually eat the food they grow. And that was not an accident. Fearing food and fearing things of nature is a campaign that started many years ago, and it worked. And that's where we're at right now. And what we really should fear is what they're putting in to processed foods, what they're putting on foods that are farming, how they're controlling the foods that are being grown. We're not growing healthy foods that are nutrient dense and diverse any longer. We're growing a few small things and we're labeling them superfoods when really, you know, like kale has one of the highest pesticide loads of all the greens available, and it's marketed as a health food. It's not even that healthy. There's so many more greens out there. Spinach is another one. Everyone wants to grow spinach because it was promoted a couple years back as a health food and being the superfood. Spinach loses, if you're buying spinach at the grocery store, it loses 90% of the vitamin C within 3 days. Most spinach has traveled 1,500 miles on average and is about 2 weeks old by the time you put it in your mouth. So the nutrients in there, most of them are dead. The soil was depleted to grow it, so it's lacking anyway. The vitamin C is gone. And it's not a superfood, yet that's how it's promoted. So everybody wants spinach. We can grow real superfoods. We can grow foods that have nutrient content in them that blows spinach like off. They don't even compare. There's no comparison in them. And they're easy to grow. That's the cool thing. Some of these foods, spinach is actually pretty difficult to grow and kind of finicky, which is why it has to be sprayed with a bunch of stuff and it's old when you get it. We can grow these amazing superfoods really, really easily. And that goes back to sprouting too. Like sprouting broccoli, I think it was like 30,000 times more nutrients in broccoli sprouts than in the broccoli floret you eat. I may have that math completely wrong, but it was something ridiculous like that. And we can do that. We can do that on our own at home. We don't have to fear it. These foods aren't going to harm us. They're going to heal us. So thank you for being here. You can find all my resources in the description below.